Hi, David. Benjamin, thanks for joining me. We're going to walk through the CASAC application together. I'm going to record it so it can be shared. I have your permission to do that, right? Could I get a nod of assent? Cool. Okay, great. We'll record this part of it. I'll take some individual questions afterwards. I'll shut off the recording. But what I'm going to do now, we can share with other people. And I'm going to start by sharing the screen on which I have opened the credentialed alcoholism and substance abuse counselor application. Is that what you're looking at, David? Shake? Somebody shake there? Okay, good. That way I don't really know what you guys are looking at until you confirm it. So good. And I have shared the wrong screen before. Not the grades, not the grades. Here we go. I'm going to scroll right down through this. So there's the purpose of the CASAC. Don't worry about it. CASAC trainee and approval. The CASAC trainee, CASAC T, that's the T, and the CASAC provisional. Provisional is new to me. That's CASAC P. They're both issued to tell an employer that you are on your way. You will have, having completed the curriculum here at Wurzweiler, you will have completed 350 hours of addiction counselor training. And the way that works is your three courses are 45 contact hours each. Times three is 135 hours. The difference between that 135 and the 350 is the rest of the social work curriculum. And when I get way down to the section on the education for a CASAC, you'll see that there's a big chunk of it that is counseling and et cetera. It's the same as your clinical 1 and 2, advanced clinical 1 and 2, human behavior, ethics, diversity. Those courses and the psychopathology, those meet the other hours that you need for a CASAC. It's this 135 that really ices the cake and lets me give you a 350, which lets you tell your employer you're a person who's completed a certain level of education. And we'll get to the training in a minute. So that's what a CASAC P or a CASAC T is, and we'll look briefly at the difference between the two of them. So the process is you do several things. You have to have the competency, education and training requirements. Education is one piece, by the way. Training is the other. These are hours, contact hours in the classroom or contact hours in a training room. These, what they're called, that's education. What they're calling training is your practice hours. So I always break it down into education and practice, education and practice. And for some of the graduate students in social work, your field placement will count towards that practice, but I get ahead of myself. So we have that. In order to get a CASAC in New York, certain requirements, and I highlighted this one ahead of the time. Guys, you'll have to have lived or worked in New York State 51% of the time during an active application. So your application is active for 5 years from the time you file it. You apply to become a CASAC. Let's say you're in Israel for the next 2 years. So what? You come back to New York, you live there, and you're there for 51% of the time of your application, then it's good for New York. So really it's kind of a New York state credential. For individuals who are in other states, I have to have a different conversation. I'm assuming you guys are both either New York or Israel. Yeah, Benjamin, New York. Good.
I'm actually legally from New Jersey, but I suppose we'll catch up with that different time.
Okay, we will. New Jersey is a little odd. Every state kind of has their little oddities, but we're good. So there's the fees, etc. Don't get dizzy with all my scrolling here. Sometimes I shut it off to scroll because it gets a little ridiculous. So here's the difference between that T and the P. The CASAC T is going to you'll have your 350. It's interesting they put this piece in because this is what I give my postgraduates. Students who have an MSW and are out there in the world practicing like LCSWs and stuff, they come back to me and get this 85 and this 15. But for you guys, you're going to be fine because you've had all of it. This says 4,000 hours of work experience. There's other places you'll see that it says 6,000 hours. Your master's degree is worth 4,000 hours of practice. So you will only ever owe OASIS 2,000 hours of supervised practice, okay? You'll graduate, you'll have all of your education. Then you have to show 2,000 hours of practice, some of which you may already have because you've been placed in an OASIS clinic or a mental health clinic or a VA. So you can count the hours, the 2,000 that a master's level person needs. You can count the hours before you even get your degree. And then, of course, you can count them afterwards. So the case the difference I found with the CASAC P guys, the provisional is this verification of employment or intent to hire. So if you are working in an agency or an agency intends to hire you to work for addiction, which I'm going to scroll down here, they would fill out this form stating this person is working or about to work in the field. And they would certify that. They'd talk about what a supervisor is and what a scope of practice is. And if your agency is good, they have a qualified health professional there who's going to sign off for you. Then you'll be a CASAC P as opposed to a T. I'm not sure it makes a whole hill of beans difference. You're still waiting for your, the rest of your hours. So let's look at the levels. You won't be this. At the least, you'll be a CASAC 2 because you'll have a master's degree. You'll have your 350 hours. You will only need 2,000 of these, despite what this says. Okay. It contradicts itself later on. The advanced counselor and master counselor will be available to you on a career path. The advanced counselor says you get your CASAC. Now, this says, at least a bachelor's, but keep in mind, your master's trumps everything. And a certificate of 30 hours of clinical supervision training, and the links to it are right there on the application. So when you get your CASAC, I would say grab your clinical supervision free training, free 30-hour supervisor training, and get your advanced counselor. It just looks better. But you will always be at least a CASAC 2. Then you can be advanced. 3 years later, you can be a CASAC master, and you'll see like Christy Aristide and some of the teachers in the class are masters because they've had that CASAC so long. Anything I should clarify about that before I keep moving?
Yeah, I have
Go
a
ahead,
quick question.
Benjamin. Mhm.
You said that it was there, it's targeted training, the 30 hours?
Yeah, this training here for the master, it's clinical supervision training. So for the CASAC master, you have to have your master's degree, which you'll have. You are an approved human service field. And then you would take this training here. There's, I think this one is a 14 and this one's a 16. And you just click on those and it'll take you to health knowledge. This one will take you to Oasis. You get those certificates and it tags you up into this league here.
And it has to be those specific 30-hour combination. Okay.
Yeah, for clinical supervision. There may be other stuff they would accept as clinical supervision, but I don't know. And I just kind of do what Oasis says in that regards. So I'm going to go down. There's that verification of employment. If you're working, then that'll make you a CASAC P instead of T. But without it, don't worry about it. It's an application summary form. This is all pretty much boilerplate. They do go for the ethnicity, gender stuff. You don't have to disclose. If you already have a license or certification, attach it, but you won't. You won't be an LMS stub yet. If you don't apply for your CASAC until after you apply for your LMSW, then you would click that. Okay. But you can see the other kinds of degrees. I have somebody in occupational therapist. Where's that? I have a registered occupational therapist inquiring about CASAC training now as well. But social workers are pretty high in the old degree food chain, so to speak. So there's going to be a bunch of affirmations. I'm going to scroll through most of this. A lot of this is, I've never been subject to disciplinary action, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of sign-offs too. You have a preferred name, you have a legal name. There's the canon of ethical principles. This is all your ethics for social. Oh, for those that are watching a recording, I'm looking up because I'm looking up at one of those other two screens that are in front of me in my background. They're really in my foreground. I know, a little Twilight Zone. But at any rate, I'm looking up at the application when I'm looking up. So, yeah, just check off on all of these. Same with the misconduct stuff. You check off and then you sign it. And this is a legal document. This is a separate add-on for people with special needs that we have to attest that we understand all of this, and you sign off on that. Footnote, historically, there were more ethical issues for people of diminished capacity, so we have to be careful with that and be sure that we understand New York law about that. But we're social workers, so generally we have had that. This is the second. Now we made it all the way to part B. So you got through the initial stuff, you know what you're applying for, you put in all your background information, you check that you're an ethical person, you check that you understand the code of conduct. Nobody's ever, taking you around for, another a license violation or anything. Or if they have, then you just explain it. Now we're in part B. Evaluation of competency has to come from somebody that you've worked with. They have to be somebody of background like this, one of these people. Generally, a social worker is going to do it. Social worker, including an individual here. So social workers can sign for social works. Rehab counselor, really somebody in a professional field that's a licensed field, a counselor certified, National Board for Certified Counselors. And they're going to fill out a form, which is here. We're still on part B, and evaluation of the form. Then this will be the applicant's name. You're giving permission for somebody to disclose information about you. Then the evaluator's name, they fill this part out. Job title, et cetera, et cetera. They have to have a copy of their credential to prove that they are in fact one of these, CASAC, licensed social worker, et cetera. This isn't a supervision form, guys. This is just a ethical competency and ethical conduct. A person who has worked with you that holds one of these licenses that is willing to vouch that you are ethical and competent and have good, comportment, demeanor, et cetera. We'll get to the signing on supervision later, but for now, for this part B, they're just going to sign off on this. All of these things, and then they'll say, yes, I endorse this person. So this really can be looked at as an endorsement. And there's that. That gets us through part B. Part C is your work experience. Say work experience, I call it practice experience, just to keep the language straight. You get your educational hours, you get your practice hours, you get your contact hours, and you have them. Now we'll talk about the work experience. It's got to be supervised by a qualified health professional. So it needs to be one of those categories that we were just looking at above for the endorsement. Same categories down here. So must be supervised, direct services. And if you remember the 12 core functions from way back in Addiction 1, we talked about 12 core functions. Here they are. Okay, screening, intake, counseling. You need to practice these 12 core functions at least 300 of the 2,000 hours that you need. 300 of them have to be doing this. Now, you're going to need 2,000 hours, but of those 2,000, at least 300 have to be in this, but of course it's going to be more. You know what I mean? The 300 is just to say you can't do all 2,000 just doing intakes. You have to have done treatment planning. You have to have done crisis intervention, a certain number. And that's delineated a little further. It just keeps people from being a one-trick pony. Is that clear? Okay, good. Then we get down. And again, remember, as an MS stub, anytime you see 6,000, it really only means 2. That'll be more clear in a minute. This was added, this application, see, it was updated last September. They threw some curveballs at me while I was in the middle of teaching my 3 courses. I'm like, what? I'm already teaching it. I had to do some updates. You cannot get your experience in a private practice. It has to be in a program consistent with OASIS standards, someone who is legal to provide addiction services. They may not be holding a certificate, or in an OASIS clinic itself, an OASIS facility. And the thing about a place holding an OASIS certificate, guys, is every single hour that you're in that door counts. There's nothing that you do in an OASIS clinic that doesn't count. If you're in a mental health clinic and you're spending, 12 hours, 15 hours a week doing substance use treatment, and the rest of the time you're treating severe mental illness with no substance use, which we know is rare, then those hours won't count. But if you're in OASIS, anything that you do while you're there counts. because it's the whole purpose of the agency. So we're still in a Part C. This is where they finally tell us, MS stub holders, that of the 6,000 hours of experience that they're talking about here, your master's itself counts for 4,000. It actually counts for more if you do your placement in an agency, in an OASIS setting or a mental health setting. You with me on that? Is that
When
okay?
you say mental health setting, do you mean like, and not private practice? What does that mean? Like I'm an intern currently at a private rehabilitation center.
Mm-hmm.
It's
And do they
it's licensed by the government and they
Good.
are accredited, but
Good.
it's
There you
private.
go. They're licensed by the government, by the state. You're in Israel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're, the health department, whoever kind of licenses hospitals and all that has licensed you guys. So you're good. Yeah. And if that agency treats addiction primarily, that's really all they do, then all your hours are going to count.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Even staff meetings or consultation with other professionals.
All right.
When you staff a thing or okay. Um, So these are all the degrees that they take. You'd be surprised how many people, I mean, you can have a degree in one of these things and be getting it. And here's social work, which is mostly what I work with, except for the post grads. But so yeah, so that's how you get your hours. You're a mandated reporter. They just want to remind you, here's your work experience. You put your name up here, you sign it, you're consenting to let whoever fills this part of it out, supervisor, etc. This can be completed by the human resource person. Um, have this information, and then they check one of these boxes. Is it an OASIS place? Is it consistent with standards and recognized by state or federal government authority, Indian Health or Veterans? And that's going to cover you, David, because you're recognized by the state authority in Israel. Or the non-certified setting are other places that do not hold that kind of certificate, but they are legally providing addiction services in the state. New York is very tight. It's not, there's states, Southwest, Southeast. You can operate a private addiction treatment facility and not really have to adhere to the state standards. In New York, you can't do it. It prevents um, fraud and people offering services that people might think would work, but they don't. They're not evidence-based. In fact, you can do some pretty dangerous things with the vulnerable population of addicted folks, telling them if you do this, give me your money and do this, you'll get better. And you can't do that in New York. But at any rate, I digress. What? Dr. Conley digressed? No, you're kidding me. Okay. See a little critical self-observation at select points in any presentation is a good thing. Look at these 12 categories again. See, this is where you're putting those hours in, you know, and they have to total at least 300. This is where they're after the 300 diverse hours, 300 hours spread across these things. Now, your application is probably going to say, if you're putting up 2,000 hours, it's going to say screening, 225, intake, 300, treatment planning, so many hours. You know what I mean? It's going to total your 2,000 down here. They're just saying you have to have a certain amount in each of the 12 core functions. Okay. In fact, devil's in the details. It is a minimum of 10 hours in each of these. So none of these can be less than 10, but know that they're going to be more and they're going to total 2,000. We all good with that? Told you the little sucker is confusing, isn't it? It can be. Um, so this is a person signing off on the hours. They love it if it comes from the human resource department, etc. Yeah. There's that. Before I get to education and training, I thought there was one more point that I want to make here. I might have to look for it, so I'm going to stop the share for a second. Give me a minute. Um, college. There we go. Mandated reporter stuff. Consent to release. Okay, good. Yep. So that's what gets signed by your work supervisor. This part is going to be quick, and then I'll start moving into my closing. This is the education and training piece, which in our program, you get your 350-hour certificate. It's a little tricky. I can't issue those until the MSW is issued because that you know what I mean? Sometimes students will ask me for the certificate after they finish the addiction curriculum. But until I know that you've completed your degree and it includes a psychopathology course, I can't issue the 350 because I have to see those other hours. So when your degree is conferred, they do a degree audit and they confirm that you've met all your requirements. Then then I can know that I can see your transcript through administration, and then I can cut the 350 certificate. But I have to be careful. I cut one and had to take it back. Early on in the process, I had issued a 350 and I went to the transcript and I'm like, you took community practice, not psychopathology, and the student had to audit the psychopath course. But at any rate, so we'll be good. So there's a standardized curriculum. You're going to be fine. You have had your 85 hours here. This is the big one. This comes from all of this. See how the cultural humility foundation, individual group counseling theories. You've had this in your practice classes for the most part. This 70 hours screening, assessment, treatment planning, I give you some of that in the addiction course because you're going over the minimum 100 that you'd need. And this 45 hours is covered. So you're good. Minimum of 15 must be specific to ethics, social work. To addiction professionals, ethics for addiction professionals there. But that is in the curriculum, so you'll be good. Now, all right, these one-time requirements are now embedded in the course. They may not have been when you took addiction 1 and 2. I'm going to stop my presentation on the application for now and talk to you guys individually. You got caught in that transition with a September 23, they started adding these certificates in. So some of them I know you are taking in addiction 3, and we'll talk about the others in a minute. Any other questions you think would be pertinent for other people that are sort of looking at this application for the presentation, Benjamin?
Yes. It is very complicated to define what an hour actually is because for a variety of different reasons. So I was wondering if you could just quickly run down how we determine hours or relevant work related hours.
Yeah, it is. I'm going to I'm looking over another screen. I'm opening, let's see, I don't want advising. I want field and forms. And I had developed a form for the documentation of CASAC hours. I actually have a meeting with the field department to talk about this because I've updated it. So are you looking at my other screen now, David and Ben? Yes, thank you. Of the 2,000 practice hours you needed, you can get up to 1,200 in field placement. It should include the 300 hours of supervised training and the 12 core functions, just like I showed you a minute ago. This is so good. I love it when the presentation gels. Everything, minimum of 10 hours. You're using these categories, okay? And then I've put this form together so that on like 9/12/23, 1.5 hours of face-to-face counseling there. And your supervisor can initial at the end of the shift. Now, this is really micro, Benjamin. This is really down to for supervisees to go through like this. Now, if that hasn't happened, if you haven't had the opportunity to document at that level, it's between you and your supervisor to have an ethical, honest conversation based on your records, on the cases that you've been managing, the work that you've been doing. You did this many hours of this so that you're comfortable with it and they're comfortable with it. And, we're all being professionals here and not fudging any hours that you didn't do. Just don't even begin to do that. you know, this form is it's a very defensive, legalistic kind of application form, as you noticed. A lot of fine print. Um, yeah, it's because it's a professional license. It's actually the application is more complicated than the LMSW, LCSW. So, yeah. So I think that's the way you do it. If you have to go back, and I've had people do that. They go back to the agency, you want human resources to say that you actually worked there for that time. Let's say you were paid, you know what I mean? You were paid for this many. You can't have exceeded the number of practice hours that you did what you were paid when you worked for an agency. But with internships, it's a little squishy because you don't get paid and they don't keep an HR like you're not punching a clock. So does that sound right?
That gave me a lot of relief. I've been worried about that because every month we get like we have to give our monthly log and they give us two of them. And my field advisor didn't even know what the CASAC was. I had to teach her what CASAC was.
This is why I'm
And
setting up another meeting with the because they have new
yeah,
people in the field office.
so that was good to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. And for your social work internships, you're keeping track of your hours anyway. You have process logs and things like that. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording and then start taking more individualistic questions. So let me see. Stop recording, but do not